Welcome everyone. It is IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and the only news program in the world offering spiritual advice for your everyday life. We do that by making the news a discussion, and then we try to raise the consciousness, take a higher perspective on the world news and events of the day, so that we might, as spiritual seekers, contribute to lifting the consciousness of the world in these events, rather than being part of the banter back and forth between egos and beliefs. So part of that, the most important part really, is for it to be a discussion. Please, tonight, engage us. Send your questions, your comments, your perspective on YouTube Live in the chat comments. Send us your questions. I will relay them to IKYA. We also have people in the live studio audience here at IKYA Center. They'll be asking questions. And together we can sort of tease out tonight's topic. And we're going to dive deep tonight into gender wars. Really, how many genders do we need? And what is the debate really about? That's what tonight's IKYA Live is all about, and part of the reason we thought it was really important is that this debate has been going on for quite some time, but has been really increasing in its intensity, and at times even getting violent. What could that really be all about? So we'll start tonight by asking IKYA, what is the gender, or what are the gender wars all about, and how many genders do we really need?
What the fuck, you know? They invent new genders all the time. And it can be difficult to understand, well, why is this happening? It doesn't make any sense. So we'll try to make sense of it all. And it's actually quite interesting, I think. But when it comes to the discussion around gender, there are two ways of looking at this. And what is confusing is that often people discussing this, they start with two different sets of premises. Now, one is looking at gender as an extension of biological sex. That's the traditional way of looking at it, which means, you know, a male has XY chromosome and a female XX, and that means that that's your gender, right? That's a traditional way, and that's completely legitimate. The newer way of looking at this is looking at our experience as individuals and saying that the experience we have of ourselves in our minds and our brains is separate from our chromosomes and a biological sex. And the brain uses more than 30 different markers to define the gender experience, because remember, it's an experience before it becomes an identity. So think of it as your brain creating an experience based on everything available. It's your consciousness, it's your karma, it's your journey, it's your experience, is your DNA, like all of that. And it creates an experience that is unique to you. And normally in the old days, we would just accept the boxes that life would give us, right? How we created identity would not be from the inside out. It would be from what other people told us that we were, right? We were basically a blank canvas when we incarnated, or so we thought, and then we were shaped. So other people told us who we were, and that's the person that we would be. And today we're starting to question that, because there is more going on inside of us than ever before. We're trying to process more information, and we look at it historically. I've said this many times before because it's important to remember. We process more information in the day than people used to do during their whole life. It's extremely complex, which means that creates stronger awareness of ourselves and how we process. I'm processing this is going on inside of me because we are in many different forms of reaction and analysis at the same time, right? And that means that you become aware of yourself as a thinking, processing being. more than when you live in a society where there's very little information, very little change, and everything is the way it's always been. And you have a little reaction here and a little reaction there, but you don't really reflect. So the change is that we're more connected to ourselves, our feelings, our pains, our suffering, all of that. And we begin to question what the world is offering us, because we can come to different conclusions. Based on everything available to us, we are creating more complex experiences in ourselves than we used to. So when we experience ourselves as more complex beings, and we experience all of these colors, and life is saying, no, this is black and white. This is black and white, and you should choose. So are you black or are you white? And you say, I have got all these colors, and it's shiny, and it's interesting, and it doesn't fit. And this is where we're at. What is happening now is the result of life having increased in its complexity and how we as human beings are processing more information, becoming more self-aware. And we have so many different reactions that our emotions and feelings are on a much higher volume than they used to be. And our assumptions and stories and all of this has increased tremendously. And we have a need to express that, and because this is who I am, right? We define ourselves based on how we feel and how we think and how we process. This is me, not the boxes outside. And often we will find that the boxes and the definitions offered by the world, they're not accurate, because I'm too, broad spectrum. And to me, this is just fascinating. And it's an important part of the change in the consciousness of this planet. So, when you have two genders and you feel, oh, that's not a lot to choose from, and when you feel all of these different elements, different waves of energy and information inside of you, you identify that with gender, because that's the main identity boxes. And then you say, I'm much more than that, and I just want to experiment and try to find my own self. And this is where it's coming from. So it comes from the mind and the emotion having entered a more complex state of being. And then we have to experiment, because that's what evolution is all about. I hope all of you can take part in the discussion today, because it's fascinating to look at this and also question our own sense of gender and identity in general, right? Because the identity we create will always be based on assumptions. We have a tendency to become the identity that we define. And this is why we can say, yeah, it's a construct. So this is why when one from the new perspective looks at gender, one can say it's a construct, because one can see that, yeah, we're all trying to fit into this kind of binary model, and yet who we are as beings is much more colorful and complex than chromosomes, right? And therefore, is the definition of who we are as humans, stuffing that into two alternatives, well, that's a construct. When you look at it from the strictly biological sense, well, then you have two options, right? So this is really what's going on now, and the discussions to me is simply hilarious. Questions?
We've got a question in the audience already.
Yes, good.
Yeah, I was thinking, because it's, could it be a bit more like fluid, and instead of having to choose your gender, oh, now I'm this and I'm transgender or whatever, because personally it's almost like in different settings I feel like a man, and then suddenly I feel like a woman, and it's like very concrete how you can go into different states and just be more fluid about it. And maybe this is something that's going to come more in the future, that we don't have to choose, I am this and that's who I am, and then maybe we could be more fluid and experiment more with
Yes, that's an excellent point. And the thing is, And at this point, we have 50 genders or something, and not accepted everywhere. But when you look at, American colleges, they just invent new ones every week. And at some point, there are so many, it doesn't mean anything anymore, right? And I think that's where we're going, because why should gender be so important? It's who you are as a being, and that is not constant. And this is the interesting thing. Once we start connecting with what's happening on the inside, it's a flow. It changes continuously. And you will change your flow and energy and state of consciousness every moment, every place, every interaction. You will adjust to that. You will use everything available to you. And I often talk about this as catalogs in your mind and in your being, that you have all these colors, all these experiences and definitions and everything, and you have this mixing table in your mind, and you will utilize everything inside of you based on the task at hand. That can be space, it can be, temperature, it can be human interaction, it can be whatever it is, but you will not ever be the same. And we're starting to discover this because we used to define ourselves based on what we saw in other people. You are this, right? And it was so primitive that in the old days, right, if you were a baker, that's who you are, that's your identity, and that's who you are as a person, nothing else, right? So that's how it started. You would identify as the individual doing something. And gradually we have recognized, all right, I am something in myself. But this increased attention to our inner worlds means that more and more people have that as a starting point. And then we recognize this exactly as it moves. And at some point, definitions will become completely irrelevant because they are. It's who you are as a being and how you express that in every moment, what you bring into the world. Because I often say being part of the LGBTQIA plus community does not make you interesting or important. It's what you do for others. Like, what value do you bring? That is what makes you interesting. That is what, can create a sense of importance. It's what you actually bring. And we have to, as a civilization, get to that point. So yes, over time, all of this, it's just immaturity. It's that we have discovered our own kind of inner self, which is then something else than the outer self, collectively. And young people, they're kind of in shock over this, and then they feel they have to reinvent themselves. Instead of understanding that there is a difference, we have the kind of projected version that other people relate to, and then we have the inner version. And once we are comfortable with the inner version and we know how to navigate, the outer version can just be what it is, because we understand it's a vehicle. Just like when you drive your car, you can have different moods. It doesn't mean that you have to repaint the car every time you're in a different mood, or, it's that. You'll get more comfortable. But this new discovery that people have of the inner as a starting point, that has to go through a lot of immaturity, and it will become quite aggressive as well. And I think it's interesting, right? Because you're supposed to be rebellious when you're young. So all of this is fun. And although it can be very aggressive, violent, and all of that, it's just part of changing the collective consciousness. But at some point, yes, gender will not really exist anymore, because we will have, as a society, gotten to the point of recognizing the individual being. And we will have terms and ways of creating space for that, and to let everyone be who they are, whenever they are, whatever they are.
We've got another question in the audience.
Yeah, Over the years, I've heard you talk a lot about evolution, and I've thought a lot about this and how evolution requires two things: stress and diversity. And in other words, if there's stress, if there's not enough coconuts on the island, or if there's enough coconuts on the island, all the monkeys just get fat and lazy. But when there's not enough, then diversity kicks in.
Exactly.
And so I'm just wondering, is this evidence of kind of an increasing diversity on planet Earth?
Yes. And you bring me to a point that is also quite interesting. We've seen this happen so many times. It happens everywhere, and it's happened on this planet so many times. Now, when you fight for survival and you build and you fight, then you will have stricter gender roles because you need it to survive. Everyone has to do their jobs, otherwise we'll all die, right? And the male energy and the male way of looking at things will be the driving force, right? So to build a civilization, it takes males. Males build, they go to war, they're more productive, they protect, all of that. And women have a higher social intelligence, but when you fight for survival, we are more binary, and it suits the male brain, which means it's, again, building, focus on the practical stuff. Once you reach a certain level and you're not fighting for survival anymore, then society will shift gears, because what is now survival? It's not necessarily fighting the outer enemy. It's not building as much as you can. It's social intelligence. So then the female energy will begin to take power. And the focus will be, again, social intelligence, empathy, nurturing each other, understanding each other. And this is what we're seeing now. As a part of that, you will also get sexual diversity, because you need more diversity within a group when you have established a civilization, because otherwise, if everyone becomes the same, the civilization will die, because it needs diversity. So you will diversify within the group. So then people will become more, they will express a spectrum. And the female energy can accommodate that more because of empathy and social intelligence and social interaction and games and manipulation. All of that gives the individual more room to experiment. And that diversity will happen both sexually and with gender, and a lot of things that belong more to the survival scheme with a male-dominated energy will disappear. So this is what we're seeing now. But the interesting thing when it comes to survival of a civilization is this is also what kills a civilization. It has happened every time so far. And the reason is, you must assume that as a culture and a civilization, you have outer enemies. The male will focus on outer enemies, going to war, protecting the group. The female energy will always focus on the enemy within, because of social intelligence, social interaction. So their focus will be on, I don't like that person. This person hurt my feelings, so now I have to manipulate there, and we have to make changes here. So the female energy will turn on itself, right? A society dominated by the female energy, everyone will start criticizing each other. The outer enemy will not be as important as the enemy you can see in your social interaction. So we start attacking each other instead. And this is also what we can see in the Western civilization. And if you look at, for instance, the left side of politics, which is more woke and all that, and therefore also has more of the kind of female energy as a starting point, they're all attacking each other, right? In politics, for instance, when you look at the Democrats in the States, often they criticize each other so much, right? The Republicans can win because they attack each other for not being politically correct enough, right? This is part of what happens also in a civilization. So what has always happened when this goes on is that the outer enemy is still there and can then begin their attacks, while within that culture they still attack each other for not dealing with it the right way. And it's just, and that will also be corrected, because at some point, then this culture will fall to a level where you have to build, and then the male energy comes back and start building. So these are just natural cycles, but it has happened so many times. The downfall of the Roman Empire was exactly this. And you could see it. When they got to this plateau, sexuality became more fluid, and gender became less important, right? And because of that, we move into social intelligence, empathy, and then at some point you start attacking each other. So this goes on and on and on and on. And we can see it being played out now. And of course, in the Western world, we can then see China and Russia. They do what they do. They never stopped. And they're not limited by whatever's going on in the West. And the rest of the world is now looking at this whole gender thing in the West and look at what is going on. They can't understand it because they are not in that part of the cycle yet. They will be at some point, but they're not there yet.
It seems like an interesting conundrum. On the one hand, you say at this point in our civilization, we have to diversify in order to function, and yet that diversity destroys it. So destroys it at the same time. How is it both necessary and destroys the civilization at the same time?
Because it's a correction as well. Remember that when we diversify, that is the result of crisis and stress, right? This is a signal that when we experience too much stress, it's like, this is not working. We have to find new solutions, and let's all become more diverse. This is also a biological process. It can also happen in a social level of evolution. But then it's also a matter of figuring out what works. Because in evolution, you can have 10,000 different attempts. One will succeed. The rest will die. That's evolution. So it's natural when you have all this diversity coming, and I'm not talking about diversity from a race issue. I'm talking about how we all become more unique in our own expression, and how that also relates to evolution as a strategy for survival, and how we've seen this in all life forms. So when that happens, most of these strategies will not work, which means in nature, a life form, those individuals and those kind of branches, they will not survive. There will be one or two strategies that will work, right? And we're seeing the same thing. So a civilization will go through the same motions as a life form, because in many ways it is an organism. And it's really fascinating to see how these movements through evolution goes a lot faster than the biological changes of evolution. So we can also understand more of how evolution in nature works by observing and analyzing the organic movements of our own civilization. So this is why a lot of these strategies, when you have enough diversity, it will not work, and in many ways it will collapse. And then the strongest strategies will take over.
From a big discussion
Sorry,
about...
one sec, we have a question in the audience. Sorry, Rick.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
From a big question about civilizations. But I was just thinking, I was talking to a friend the other day, and he's got a daughter who's in the 3rd grade. She's 9 years old here in Oslo. And he said that out of the 29 children that are in the classroom, 8 of them are non-binary, which is a new thing for a lot of people. How do we work with children and kind of help them in this kind of world right now? What do you suggest for that?
Right. First, let me address something interesting, that being left-handed, when you go back in history, was basically as bad as being transgendered. And you were not supposed to talk about it because it could give kids ideas. And You would correct them, try to force left-handed people to write with their right hand, because left-handedness was silly, obviously, and there was something seriously wrong with them. You didn't want to encourage that. Now, once that changed, you had a spike in people identifying as left-handed. And then it stabilized, because there's a limit to how many left-handed people there are. So when people naturally then were allowed, and kids were allowed, to write with whatever hand felt natural to them, you would have a steady growth of individuals being left-handed, and then it stopped. And then you had the kind of natural level of left-handed people. So there's a limit to how many individuals are transgender. Just like there seemed to be a natural limit for how many people are gay, for instance. It's part of variation. Remember that we have many different journeys. When we incarnate, we want different journeys. This is not McDonald's, right? There's room for that, but we need more than that. And we're starting to discover many different ways to be human, to utilize the human potential, which is so specialized if we allow it to be. Now, when you have kids growing up and they had no idea that being non-binary even existed, of course they would not identify as that. And they would just try to be normal, and they would feel something was wrong, but there was something wrong with me, right? That's always the conclusion that we draw as a child. And this is a proven fact within psychology, that most kids will draw the conclusion that there is something wrong with me. And then we're traumatized for the rest of our lives, which means that the normal person does not exist and is an unhealthy concept. Because most people are then struggling the rest of their lives, not just because of gender, it could be anything, but it means we have not yet acknowledged that we are all individually unique. And now we're starting to unpack that. And gender is one thing, and now we will have a spike. And it's not just because of gender. When you feel that there is something wrong, I'm not fitting in, and then everybody talks about like being non-binary, that's your go-to. It could be difference in consciousness, right? It could be that you're coming directly from another planet. And because you feel that I don't feel comfortable in this human thing, I don't understand it, then I must be transgender, right? So you go there because that is the information you have, right? So now more individuals will identify as non-binary, but it's more a matter of not feeling comfortable as a human. And that is, as I said, there are so many incarnating now, coming directly from other life forms, from other cultures, from other planets, as part of the change on this planet, and us kind of redefining what the human is, and the human journey, and opening up the spiritual potential. So they will always feel that there is something wrong here, right? And this culture still is based on what we refer to as the old paradigm, where you have kind of classic humans being spiritually asleep. And then you have a lot of individuals now incarnating with a higher level of consciousness, with more expanded experience, more expanded awareness of themselves. And they are like injected into humans, and they don't understand this primitive life form. But gender is interesting because it's such a trigger for society. So, back to how to talk with kids. I think it's just letting them be who they are. Understand that many non-binary kids, they will grow out of it, but remember that we are not just strictly male or female. That is biology. In our minds, we're like 1 to 100 and everything in between, and we're flowing. We both have male, female energies and many different combinations. So being non-binary is also a way to identify that I am me. I will not be limited to certain boxes. I will just express myself. So for many, being non-binary is really not about gender as much as it is trying to find one's unique expression and having the freedom in the non-binary to also be kind of a non-binary being, non-binary mind, non-binary emotions, non-binary expressions, and even, being a transhuman, right? And opening up. But the label now is that. And so many kids coming directly from other planets, they will identify with the non-binary thing because that's a space where you already can flag, I'm not a normal human. Thank you very much, right?
We've got a nice queue of questions on YouTube.
Good.
First, Johnny in Quito, Ecuador says that what you're saying is worthy of our evolution and thanks you so much for doing this great work. And then Caroline in Germany asks, this circle happening again and again in our civilizations, is there no learning or evolution out of this? Why do we keep repeating?
Oh, the reason why we keep repeating is that it's more of a structure. It's new individuals going through these cycles. So it's like a fun ride at Disney World, right? It's still there. When you've done the ride and you've gotten what you need out of it, new people come in. So when you have these organic cycles in nature, they work. And it's a study program where you go through different motions and you will incarnate wherever what is going on correlates with your karma in your own point of evolution. So it will be part of some movements or whatever. So it's never about being finished. Nature is never finished. Just like you could say the same thing about the seasons. Now we have spring, summer, like fall and winter. When will we ever learn, right? It's like that, understanding that the different cycles we move through and why they repeat, it's because they are like seasons. And they also change, as we see, based on climate changing and all of that. The seasons are never the same, but you still have the basic structure. So how we work as an organism in the organism of this planet, that will repeat itself because it's the premise of everything, and we can still learn and we grow. And many people who have incarnated here, they moved on to other places, and then there are new individuals coming in because they seek exactly this. Remember, there's so many individuals wanting to incarnate on this planet right now because of all of this. Humans are opening up. The old definitions of what it means to be human and the human journey, it's basically getting pulverized at this point. And it's wonderful and exciting, and at the same time it can be very confusing when you're attached to the old forms. But there are millions and millions and millions of individual souls coming in who have never been on this planet before, and they will shake things up. So better get used to it.
All right, Anka in Germany has a fascinating question, actually. You have talked about being in a female or male body function as a kind of filter that gives us a specific perspective. And when we gradually are not emphasizing genders that much, will our physical bodies also begin to change to reflect that evolution?
Yes. A lot of intelligent life forms in the physical universe, they are not binary anymore. Because at some point you stop reproducing biologically, and it will happen through other means. Just like I've talked about before, that next century, becoming pregnant, that will be really old school. That would be for the hardcore, vintage people. But normal people, they will basically design what kind of baby they want. And in some societies, it will not even be a family setting. It will be society or the government, based on what type of government you've got. So there will be all sorts of variations. But yes, you will more have a kind of neutral start point if that's what you want. But it depends what the collective consciousness also wants, because when we also begin to understand, remember in physics, they are beginning to understand that this is a projection. This is a hologram. This is not real. And we can say, well, it looks real. Yeah. If you were in a hologram, it will look real to you. So we are starting to understand that this is not as solid as we thought it was, which means that we also understand that our consciousness can influence matter. There are plenty of experiments in physics having shown, yeah, consciousness in the mind can affect matter. So when we have the inner and our consciousness as a starting point, our physical bodies will over time be in a way influenced. And if you have a strong consciousness, it will be reprogrammed so that your consciousness can operate more freely instead of being the result of the biological processes and then consciousness being you not being asleep, right? It's the biological human being awake doing its thing. When we talk about spiritual consciousness, it's you as a being incarnating and becoming aware of that and taking over, right? So you can then redefine what you do here. Going past the autopilots, going past the limitations in your DNA. And many spiritual traditions, they've been trying to figure out how to get past the human mind and the human body and do things that for many scientists they would define as defying laws of nature. I just say it's going beyond the current understanding. You can't go beyond the laws of nature because if something is happening, it is within the laws of nature. It will be within laws of nature that our culture may not have discovered yet. It's still part of nature. So it's understanding that the more we have our minds and our consciousness as a starting point, we become less limited by our bodies because we do not identify with it, right? It's a vehicle. It's a filter. It's something that can give you access to certain expressions. But as we understand, oh, right, I am fluid. I do not have to let myself be stopped by the DNA in this body or the kind of genetic bias. As consciousness, I can go wherever I want to go and explore and express beyond what is already in my DNA. And humans will do that. But it will depend on what individuals incarnating in this life form wants, because there is nothing wrong with having two sets of chromosomes, right? It creates more dynamic and it can also be very interesting. It's also interesting to be in one set of chromosomes and opening yourself up to the full spectrum energy, right? So there is no limitation in the biology in and of itself once you have the starting point of you being a soul incarnating into this life form. But this will become the most common way of looking at things when we, go a few generations into the future.
Tom has a question that we addressed and from one angle on our IKYA Live episode about Andrew Tate and toxic masculinity. But here he asks, about masculinity, how can young men trying to become men in this new world, how do they find their way?
Yes. This is a question that deserves a full seminar. Because today, as the result of the female energy becoming more aggressive and in many ways taking over, being male is looked upon as a problem or a disease. And of course, it's not. Male values are extremely important and beautiful. And the classic male values, providing, taking care of your family, taking care of everyone, also those who are not within your immediate family, It's always taking responsibility, always making sure everybody is okay, protecting, doing your duty, always doing what's necessary, always filling in for others, always standing up for what is right, having a backbone, always taking whatever people are kind of serving you and focusing on the bigger picture, and always being the builder, always being the one people can rely upon, always being the supporter, always understanding that you have to set the good example for other people. Those are masculine values. And men always used to strive towards those ideals, and there were a male culture where ethics and being the bigger person and providing and protecting and all of that used to be something that every male would strive for. So that's become a little bit lost. And this is also why I think many young men are attracted to guys like Andrew Tate, because they can see some of that energy. But, you know, it's a cliche, as I've talked about before. Of course, men will rediscover masculinity because it's needed. We need the dynamics, right? We need also the positive polarization. And men will have to reinvent the masculine values in a modern world. And more young men are turning towards classic masculine values. And that's not being a brute, being violent, being loud, you know, like make me a sandwich, bitch. It's not that. It's what I just talked about. Those have been the classic ideals. And many men, young men, they see that they have to be true to who they are. Because remember that in a spectrum, someone will feel fluid, and yet someone will feel very at home in the classic values and expressions of their gender. Diversity means also accepting the traditional versions, right? And having room for that. So we're just in a weird and interesting place historically where we are moving through evolutionary process very fast. And it can be very confusing. But I think teaching young guys about classic masculine values, that would be important. And I actually encourage parents with boys to teach them about the classic masculine values because they can be reinterpreted. And there is a reason why men have expressed themselves that way and why they've felt a sense of purpose when they have been living through these ideals. It is also part of the male spectrum. So when you incarnate into a male form, at least knowing about the classic male values and how men have lived their lives throughout history, I think that is important. And I think we are depriving ourselves of the positive masculinity by not allowing for young boys to become men.
So Elizabeth here in Norway, she asks, is the tradwife movement, and I had to look that up to see what it was, tradwife meaning traditional wife or traditional gender roles. So is the tradwife movement, the alt-right movement, are they the ones kind of on the other side of this debate, and will they be able to coexist in this world as with gender fluidity, or will they have to die out or some other variation?
No, I think it's part of becoming aware of the different ways, the different pathways, and becoming aware of what you identify with. I love the tradwife movement. And it's not just the wife, it's also the husband. For those of you who are not informed about this, it's younger people often choosing more traditional gender roles and establishing families. It's basically 40s and 50s style, and they're very happy because when I teach couples, I often talk about how important it is for a couple to be kind of specialized. It used to be throughout evolution that females had certain tasks, certain jobs, and men had certain areas of responsibility, and that creates polarization in a positive way that can also create sexual tension. For instance, one thing that is really important is that we need to admire our partners, which means it's really wonderful to see someone being really good at what they do, and I say, I couldn't do that, because then you can see they add value, right? So it's the traditional structure will give both parties a language through which they can express themselves and show that I'm doing my part. I show my love through doing this, right? So many people feel that when everybody is supposed to do everything, nothing is getting done, and we become too narcissistic. Because when you look at humans today, and they're like in our part of the world, and their ability to keep a relationship, it's embarrassing, right? Most marriages, they will fail, and we find a new one, and we fail because we're not willing to put in the work. But how can we know that we're actually doing what we're supposed to? How can we know that we're contributing? When it's simply down to, I feel that you're not seeing me, right? Then it's difficult. When we have tasks, when we have responsibilities, and when we do certain things that add value to the family, add value to our lives together, that strengthens love. And you see throughout evolution, this is how it's worked. So we also need in a relationship to be able to show concretely that not I love you because you're you, but also I love you because you do this and this and this, and I admire that, and it turns me on. So this is part of that trad movement. And it's not for everyone, but it's interesting when people choose it and they find that positive, like polarizing dynamic. And they're often very productive and very happy, and they're also focused on adding value and showing each other their appreciation and like doing real things. So you step out of the narcissistic approach to relationship and more like building it together. So yes, I don't think this will die out. It's just started. Remember that part of where we are at this point, because we have an explosion in one end, we'll also have the going back to traditions on the other side as a reaction, and because we also need polarization. So the further we go in that direction, we'll also go in that direction, and then we have a full spectrum. But it is important to remember that also traditional values are part of the spectrum. So it's not like we all have to be very gender fluid in everything. That becoming available also means that some people will identify even more with their gender, and they will explore that. And that is wonderful. It's also absolutely wonderful when someone becomes aware, oh, I'm in a female body, I'm a woman. What is that? And what is that today? Right? And often one can look at the classic approach and say, there is something here. We don't have to reinvent everything, but we can learn from that and then reinvent that into what it means to be alive today.
Caroline in Germany, one of your newest IKYA students, she asks a fundamental question. How do we as individuals find out who we truly are and what we really want, as opposed to all these very old and deep imprints about gender or anything else?
Yes, and that's the big question. This is the essence of spiritual work, because we start by having so many assumptions about life, assumptions about ourselves and others. And then we start recognizing there is something off here. You know, there's something that's not right. And then we begin to peel away. Right? And then we have to learn how to do that. And this is what spiritual work is about. is understand, oh, this is all illusions, even my own definitions. They're not true. And this is the wonderful thing about living today, where things are changing so fast that we can more easily recognize that, right, what I thought is not productive. I need to change, I need to adapt, I need to learn, which means we start questioning more of our own intentions, thoughts, and knowledge, right? And that's very healthy, because we need to peel it all away. It's a very long process, and everyone who has been involved with true spiritual work for some time, and by that I mean at least 20 years, you will know that, yeah, you're still scraping the surface. Like, it takes time, and it's a lifelong dedication to find truth, knowing that there is nothing out here that is true, nothing in you in and of itself that is true. You have to peel away on the outside and the inside, and gradually you're left with something that cannot be defined, something that is not the self, something that is beyond the definition construct of you. You even have to peel away you. This is why it takes so much time, because how do I do that? Exactly. But we figure it out over time. We really do. And we just experiment with, how can I first enter my own mind and my own life, and how can I navigate, and how can I explore and go beyond it and live in it and do all of these things and be in many different positions at the same time. Everyone who find themselves on a spiritual journey for real, they get a sense of more freedom and flexibility, and they believe less. They believe less of their own thoughts and definitions, and they don't believe the world, and they can see that, oh, this is the meeting place for all our karma, all the expressions, everything we have to go through. But it's not about that. It's about what it does to us and how that can adjust us to connecting more inside, to go deeper, to go higher. Because truth cannot be defined, it cannot even be experienced. But we can be it, we can allow it. So living today also means that that process can happen more quickly. If we truly practice, if we truly study spiritual principles, if we do the work, we can peel away more faster than humans have ever been able to do, which for me is fun, and hopefully for all my students, they think it's fun as well, to really plow through illusions and opening both the doors within, but also opening the doors to a level of life, like in this outer world, that is beyond what one could possibly imagine even 100 years ago.
So we've got a question about, what about these pronouns thing? Like, what is it really about? And it seems to also increasingly be connected to that aggression that has come out in this debate and discussion. So why is it getting more violent and aggressive, and what are the pronouns all about?
Yes. Now, the pronouns thing, I think it's so funny because it's just a power game. It's all it is. Remember that traditionally. Now, you have the freedom to think and identify and do whatever you want to. But the pronouns thing is about forcing other people to submit to you. I make up my own reality, and then I'm forcing you to submit to that. That is really what it is about. And when you have some of these communities, whatever, now defining misgendering someone as violence, it's trying to compel speech, forcing someone to say something, and it's never been done before. It's historically new, and it's very aggressive because it is a power game. Of course, it's not violence for someone to talk with you. You can be very respectful and still not understand your definition of gender or your pronouns. But it is just a power game. Now, I've talked about this many times, but it is interesting that there are two major ways to win in the game of survival. And one is by winning, to achieve something, to climb the mountain. And if you can't, the best way is to be the biggest victim. because then you can come up with, oh, I'm hurt, and that's why I couldn't climb, because if I did, I would totally win. But you see, I'm hurt, so you all got to help me. So it's a way when we become the biggest loser, when we become the victim, it's a state of entitlement. It's a way to manipulate others, to give you stuff, and to create guilt and all of that. It has worked throughout evolution. This is why we have these two major strategies. So in a society, when you look at the states, which have had an extreme focus on success, climbing the mountains and winning, the flip side is that you also create an extreme victim culture, because when society grows, right, it means the mountains get higher. It used to be you could be the best in your village. Now it's the best in the country and the best in the world, which means when you have an extreme winning culture, it kind of, you get mergers. Like the mountains get higher and it's more difficult, and you have fewer winners, which means everyone at some point in this game will then start feeling like a loser. And we have to justify that and make up stories about ourselves. It's because of this, it's because of that. And at some point, we create a victim culture. It always happens. It's happened before. This is nothing new. But any civilization that focuses too much on success will create an enormous victim culture. And this is what we're seeing now. You're winning by being the biggest victim. And a lot of what's going on, especially among young people in the States and also increasingly in Europe, is that young people feel that they've lost before they begin. Look at the housing market, right? Many young people today, they will never ever be able to afford to buy a home. They've lost before they begin. So when they feel, okay, I've lost, this is a game, someone obviously created these rules, and I've lost before I've even started. So the only way to win then is to competing, trying to become the bigger victim. And this is what you see. So a lot of what we're seeing is not just the gender thing, it's using that as a weapon. Finding ways to be the bigger victim so you can be in a state of entitlement and demand respect. Demand that other people do what you want them to do, because that's also a way to win. So when you experience yourself as being kind of disenfranchised, you will come up with different survival strategies. And because rule of evolution is you will try whatever to win. You will manipulate, you will lie, you will steal, you will kill, you will do absolutely whatever. And you will. So this is an attempt at manipulating people and creating a fantasy and then forcing other people to believe in it. It's the same thing we see with conspiracy theories and like that whole bunch. Same thing. They're making political policies out of that, right? So it's the same thing. It's human nature. But it is a power game. So I would say, like, if you meet someone and they're very aggressive about this, you don't have to comply. Do whatever you want to. You can show someone respect and still not submit to their power games, right? And today, we can be so afraid of not being politically correct that we get absorbed in these games, and we think we're doing it wrong because, we also have to be intelligent and try to take a step back and see what's really happening here. A lot of this is just silliness, it's childish, and it's part of what we as human culture, we have to move through it. But try to look at what will happen, 10 to 20 years from now, 100 years from now, how we will look at it. When in doubt, look at classic values. I'm not talking about classic oppression, classic limitation. I'm looking at classic ideals. Again, it's ethics, empathy, doing your part, taking care of yourself, your own survival and your family, being an example for others, doing good work, contributing to the world, like all of this. And try to look at that. Let that be kind of your guidelines in life. And from that position, look at when somebody wants you to do something. Say, okay, is this actually ethical? Is this something I can be comfortable with? Right? Because if we're talking diversity, there's also room for you. It's interesting often when we see people obsessed with diversity, they do not agree with anyone who is not in agreement with their view on diversity. Right? And they become extremely aggressive. But because they have the right definition, that's not diversity. Right? So try to see through the power games and the victimization and all of that. And say, we're just humans trying to figure it out. And you have the right to do it your way. So that was the
We have one
pronouns
last
thing.
Yeah, we have one last question from
Yep,
Rick in the
sure.
audience here.
Yeah.
So in the interest of accelerating and improving my own spiritual growth, it's been really interesting to think about how can we use gender as a tool, as a way of understanding. We often go to a Tantra festival each summer, and one of the days there they have only men with men, and some of those most interesting days because it's a day where one challenges the traditional gender role. So I'm curious your advice on using gender as a spiritual tool.
Yes. Gender is a spiritual tool if you want it to be. It doesn't have to be. Depends on your consciousness. But I think over time, we will more recognize that there are different flows. We live in, a dualistic reality, which means that we need polarization, positive polarization, and the spectrum in between. And I would also think it's interesting, for instance, for men to study the female energy in themselves and for women to study masculinity. But understanding why we have chosen a certain form instead of fighting it, to me, is more interesting. Right? And sometimes incarnate, yes, you are to transform it. And I've said many times that I think, jokingly, that more people should, transition, because it's creative. It's at least not just sitting there and being miserable. You're taking creative control. And so, but when it comes to being male or female and the whole spectrum, I think it's always about exploring who you are also in your journey, finding your version of it. I often talk about becoming a mother or a father. To me, you don't need children for that. It's a state of consciousness. And the mother is understanding the nurturing side and looking at also what females have been throughout the ages. Again, looking at the classic values, what can we see when we look at human history and evolution, right? What is a common thread? And when you look at the female body, of course, it's a nurturer. It gives birth, right? It holds. You have a higher self-intelligence, stronger empathy, able to connect, to kind of like hold that energy in space and go beyond your self-interest. And you're often better at kind of gardening people and sharing love and supporting and be less competitive, which means that you can include more, right? And a mother, if you look at a mother taking care of her child and bringing up her child, those are qualities that are not limited to having a child. It's also being that person to others, being that person in life. And it's the same thing. For me, a man becomes a man when he is a father. And that is, again, taking care of others. Being a provider, which means if you don't have a family, it's looking at the needs of others and being of help, being of assistance, always being someone other people can rely upon, to always be there when people need you, to be a pillar of your community. It's always taking responsibility and finding solution and helping. It's having a very high moral behavior. Always, again, taking care, seeing the bigger picture, setting your own self-interest aside for the higher good. A father has to do these things if he's a good father. And as a man, you grow up. You are an adult male when you behave like a father. And a woman is an adult female when she behaves like a mother. This is also what we often see when you have kids. Something happens in you that's very positive. But this narcissistic, self-indulgent culture we have right now is not sustainable because it's self-serving. We can only bring a civilization forward when we're actually trying to contribute and when we take responsibility and when we connect to something greater than ourselves. And that's growing into motherhood and fatherhood and being that person. And you can do that no matter how you experience yourself in the gender spectrum, right? It's then being someone who contributes beyond you and do not act out of self-interest all the time. A father and a mother will be individuals who are already taking care of themselves so that they can be in service for others, not just figuring out how I can get more for me, because that's not really interesting. We all know that giving, when we truly give, that's the greatest state we can be in. Narcissism will bring us to destruction. And more people are depressed than ever. People are struggling. This enormous focus on self-indulgence we have in the West will make people depressed, disconnected, and sick, and they will feel lack of purpose because you can never have yourself as a purpose. Purpose is always outside of the self. And the Western culture has failed completely. So we need to grow up and be individuals that can contribute and to be leaders, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of others. At the same time, we exist in a time where consciousness is rising. And we're growing out of the old formats. This is what the whole gender war thing is about, is that we are evolving. More advanced souls are incarnating, and they do not identify with the old culture. We're going through an enormous shift. I talk to so many young people from all over the world who recognize that they're not from here because they are not. They just know. And they know that they're here to bring in higher consciousness. They have no awareness of it. They are here also to be disruptors. They know it. They have purpose beyond themselves. And then you have a lot of these young people who are just being sucked into it, still in the old consciousness, and they go through what they go through. So they will have a more immature experience of what is going on. But in general, this is about opening our culture to new potentials, to a more advanced way of being human. Because this is where we're heading, where the individual expression will be everything. That will be who you are. But then because everybody is doing it. That does not make you interesting. It's how do you utilize what you have that is unique? How do you bring the results of that into the world? How are you actually adding something of value to the world around you? Now we're in this stage where we're just beginning to unpack the fact that we're all unique, that we're all on different journeys, we have different essence. So we go through all this childishness, but it's necessary. Over time, this will be refined. We will find balance where we're able to use both the classic values and at the same time be in higher consciousness and have freer expressions. So we will get there, because for this planet and this civilization to survive, yes, we need diversity, but we need the purity of heart, and we need higher consciousness. In the higher consciousness, we're able to see the connectedness. We can see the results of what we do. We make our decisions not from what's in it for me, but what's in it for the world around me. We will move there because it's just a natural part of the evolution of this life form. So this is why at this point it's exploding in all directions, and the fabric of our civilization is dissolving. But what will come instead will be much, much stronger, because we need a new platform to both nurture and give space to this new consciousness and this new version of human. And in the meantime, we have all this kind of gender stuff and all this identity politics and all of that. So look at everything in longer lines. Everything is more fun and entertaining that way. And you don't have to take any of it seriously. You can just say, this is evolution happening right before your very eyes. Everything is going faster than it used to. So humans are transforming. We are changing. And it doesn't look like it yet, but we are becoming better. Just give it a few hundred years, right? Which is a very short time when we look at evolution. Try to look at everything from a higher consciousness. And also in your journey, you have to start from within. And ask the big questions. Why are you here? Why did you choose this planet? Remember that there are trillions and trillions of planets just in this one dimension with intelligent life. Why did you choose this one? Why did you choose this life form and the expression of the person that you are in? Why is that the perfect vehicle for your next step in your evolution? Try to think about that. Try to connect with everything you are, everything you bring with you. Many of you are bringing with you competence from other planets, and you know it. Well, just saying that I'm special, it does not provide anything of value. If you have something of a higher nature, bring it in. Do not pose. Do something productive. There is a reason why you're here. Connect with your purpose. Connect with what's happening in the world and make a difference. As I said many times before, protesting and criticizing is not contributing. It's destructive. Innovate. Make things better. Contribute. Teach. Build. That's how you do it. But always start from within. Appreciate your journey here. Appreciate the enormous spectrum of what's available to you and use it. What's being more and more evident as, for instance, young people are inventing new genders all the time, it's like discovering new colors and new shades. It's all over, not just in the gender world. Try to look at yourself as a unique being and express yourself that way. express your journey, your consciousness, your competence, the intelligence that you have within, the truth you have within, the skill set you already had before you incarnated. Be someone that makes the world better, that uplifts, that heals, and that loves. Because this is how you lift the world, not by being interesting, but by using what is interesting in you for the good of all life, all people, and this whole planet.
Thank you so much, IKYA, for lifting this discussion around gender to a much higher perspective. And thank you all, both here in the studio and on YouTube Live, for joining us for IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and the only news program in the world truly giving you spiritual, practical advice for your everyday life. And again, this is also a news program that's about discussion, debate, exchange, and so be part of the discussion. Join us next week, Monday at 7 o'clock every week for IKYA Live. Bring your questions, your comments, your perspective, but also keep the discussion going by sharing tonight's episode, subscribing to our YouTube channel, IKYA.official, and joining us on social media. TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram are all IKYA.official. And also check out everything that's happening at IKYA.org, our homepage, and sign up for our newsletter. We have an absolutely amazing, kind of groundbreaking spiritual study, continuing actually our fourth year of the IKYA Aligned Crystal Healing course. It is absolutely the deepest and highest study of spiritual principles in the world. So you've got to check it out. And it's starting already in just 4 weeks. And we have a free open house about that course just in 2 evenings from tonight, Wednesday, the 31st of May at 6 o'clock Oslo time, both here at the center and again on YouTube Live. So follow along on our YouTube channel and in all of the different channels that we are. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you next Monday at 7 o'clock for IKYA Live.